For something new at Ontario Sheep Farmers, Ontario Sheep Farmers has been participating in the process to develop regulations to accompany the Veterinarian Professionals Act. On April 16th, our organization submitted a letter to the College of Veterinarians of Ontario to comment on their proposed regulatory guidelines. The letter and the proposed guidelines are on the OSF website under Advocacy if you would like to read more. This is an intermediate step in the development of regulations. OMAFA will be taking the input from this process to develop regulations, and there will be another open comment period for commodity organizations and the general public in the future. Now let's get into today's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flock Talk. I'm Erin Morgan, and I work for the members of the Ontario Sheep Farmers. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Jane Underhill to the podcast. Jane is the owner of Underhill Canadian Wool Agency, a company dedicated to building a modern and resilient Canadian wool ecosystem. Thanks for joining me, Jane.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Erin. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing. Well, let's get started by just easy question. Tell us about yourself and how you got involved in the Canadian wool industry.
Okay, well, I'm based in Quebec. I'm not sure if people know that. I'm an Anglophone who works bilingually. I'm based out of Quebec. And I would say that at the core, I'm a business person and an entrepreneur. So the lens through which I see things is a business one. And the way I approach wool is with real world efficiency and profitability in mind. I've been part of the Canadian wool industry for probably a decade now. And in the early years, I think I sort of poured myself into the existing mold of the industry. I took a lot of time to learn how things worked, who the players were, what the legacy of the industry is and was, and what its limitations are. And I would say today I've cast a new mold for myself and for others to work from, and one that kind of reflects a business framework that I believe in, that I can get behind, and one where Canadian wool is valued differently, where we're championing innovation, and I work toward a supply chain that operates collaboratively.
That sounds amazing. So in this new venture, can you tell us about the work your company does?
Oh, with pleasure. So my company, Underhill Canadian Wool Agency, agency is a word that I chose deliberately because like an advertising agency, we offer a suite of B2B services tailored for Canadian wool. So my key areas of focus are really three. White label manufacturing. This is where we manufacture products using Canadian wool that will carry our customers' logo and branding. I do research and development, and those are things like innovation, prototyping, all using Canadian wool. And we offer wool marketing services, and that's where we match wool buyers with wool sellers. And this summer, we actually have a new service that's being offered. I call it the JU Wool Business Center. It's an online feature where entrepreneurs can book affordable, no commitment consultations, and we'll tackle together the business challenges in the Canadian wool industry that the entrepreneur is facing. So basically, clients will book 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or 60-minute consultations. We can do them by video or by telephone, and we'll address whatever opportunity or obstacle they're working on. And I plug this because this is a feature that's representative of how my company works. We respond to real world business problems. And sometimes business owners need a little help, not a lot of help. They just need a boost. They just need to know they're on the right track. And this new service, I hope, will answer that need.
Amazing. So I'd like to sort of work globally and then work back to the local market if we can. And maybe starting with, can you give us an idea on a global perspective who our biggest competitors are as Canadian wool producers?
Yeah. Well, I think largely Canada competes against countries like New Zealand, Australia, the UK, places with long-established wool industries, infrastructure, and investment to move their industries forward. I also think that Canada is up against the merino marketing machine. You know, merino has had clever branding for several decades now that has made merino wool synonymous with quality. But at a cellular level, wool is wool. There's a suitable application for every type of wool. But the merino brand is powerful and it's stuck in the consumer's mind. So we have a little bit of an education curve there to compete against. And I think our biggest competitor is probably synthetics. And now more than ever, with all of these recycled polyester fibers that are on the market that don't consider that, yes, it's great that it's a recycled fiber, but there is also microplastic slut off that comes from those fibers that are choking waterways. So there, yes, we have competition in Canadian wool, but we also have some really good speaking points, some really good opportunities to differentiate ourselves. And I would also say that we're up against some misunderstanding amongst our own producers of the quality of wool that we have in the national clip. But that's changing. I feel like our producers are becoming more and more aware of the quality they're growing.
Amazing. So when we are promoting our own wool, where do we have a competitive advantage?
I think we have lots of competitive advantages, and I talk about this quite a bit when I'm presenting to producers, when I'm presenting to consumers. Brand Canada is strong both at home and around the world. The fact that our wool comes from this nation is our competitive advantage. And this was brought home to me several years ago when I was speaking with a colleague in a foreign country. And he said, Jane, never underestimate the power of doing business with Canada because we are good business people. We are honest business people. And he said, when you order something from Canada, it shows up on the date it's supposed to show up at, the quality that you've ordered at the price you've agreed upon. And he said, that has a lot of value. But in terms of our wool itself, I think that Canada has an excellent animal welfare track record. We have smart, knowledgeable farmers. We have sheep that are raised in high quality environments. They're exposed to fresh air, good nutrition plans, clean water. They're on rich pasture land when they're outside. We have relatively low UV exposure on our sheep, and our sheep typically have access to veterinary care. Our producers have access to expert advice, and medications are available as needed. And the other thing I think where Canada has a strength, and I don't know as everyone would agree with me, but I think it's our diversity of breeds. We have some really phenomenal breed crosses here, and we overlook that because we think that we should always be choosing one single breed, and we should be branding that breed like Merino has been branded. But I disagree. Our scientific tests have shown that, especially when we see Arcot genetics in the crosses, that always brings our micron down a point or two every time there's a Rito Arcot in the genetic mix. So I think the breed crosses are one of our strengths among just the quality of our producers and the fact that we're here in Canada.
Amazing. So what can we do to gain an edge?
Oh, well, I would say we need to improve our yields, and that can be as easy as some procedural changes at shearing and in farm management. And when I say that, Erin, I'm not saying big changes and I'm not saying costly changes. It's just a little bit more information in the hands of the producer that make a big difference when that wool moves into the buyer's hands and moves into scouring. I would say that we could gain an edge around the regularity or the consistency of the wool. And this type of investigation can start with your breeding selection. So, if you've got an animal that produces a really long staple and an animal that produces a short staple, and that cross is giving you the meat quality that you want, that's fine, that's great. But it might not give you an equal fiber because you're going to have both of those genetic crosses there. You're going to have some longer staples and some shorter staples. That will ultimately devalue your wool and make it harder to work with. We will have more loss in production because that wool is irregular. And also, our fiber length, 3.5 inches, is the ideal in Canada. We are a woolen spun nation, and that means that when we are moving into spinning our wool, we are carding and then spinning. And our carders can't take staples much longer than 3.5 inches, or I think that works out to 89 millimeters. So that means that you can shear sooner. Don't wait to shear because you think a longer clip is going to be more advantageous. It's not. And our long wool breeds will find buyers in the worsted and semi-worsted spinning systems. But that method of spinning at a commercial scale at the micron that our wool is, that doesn't exist in Canada. So if you have long wools, you're going to be sending them through the mini mill system, which does a beautiful job, but it's more costly because the efficiency of those machines is lower, the capacity is lower. I like commercial spinning because this is where I can move a large volume of wool and I can put it into production in a cost-effective way. So the woolen system works great for me, and 3.5 inches is all I need, so you can bring your shearer in a bit sooner if you'd like.
Okay, well, that's really great information. So now coming back home to what we do here, what are the opportunities for the wool we produce, and then what end products is it suited for?
That's a great question, and it's one that's always changing. My company uses Canadian wool to make bedding, rugs, drapery, upholstery, and socks. Bedding for me is mostly blankets, but there is a new movement in Canadian wool for duvets, for pillows, also for mattresses. Mattresses we could talk about later. I'm not sure that Canadian wool is that's the right use as mattresses, but certainly there is some opportunity there. In addition to those kind of home decor items, I see emerging trends around outerwear, like fishermen's sweaters, also wool batting for clothing insulation, and wool for industrial or agricultural cloth. There's a lot of movement in those areas right now. I would encourage people to move away from the idea that Canadian wool can be used for home insulation. Home insulation typically requires a 35 micron wool and up, and the price tolerance is relatively low. It has a hard time competing against synthetic insulation. And so our wool is a finer, spongier, more lustrous wool in a slightly low micron. And we have slightly higher harvesting costs of our wool. Our shearers charge a little bit more than in other countries, et cetera. So I don't think that Canadian wool is a good application for home insulation. And I would like to, put that message out there because it still comes back to me after all these years. Oh, maybe Canadian wool is good for home insulation. And I really think that we can build better value in our wool. And something else I would like to share is that my company has a new product that's launching in July, and it's in partnership with Lemieux Spinning. Lemieux Spinning is based here in Quebec. It is if not Canada's oldest woolen spinning mill, it's one of the oldest. It's been around almost 120 years now, 119 years going into 120 years. We are launching a wholesale collection of undyed and dyed knitting yarn. The undyed knitting yarn will be perfect for indie dyers or people who want to sell an inventory of undyed wool to the indie dye industry. The collection of wool, we are calling it Joseph Albert Collection, and that's named after the founder of Lemieux Spinning, Joseph Albert Lemieux. This is our first launch into making wholesale knitting yarn in skein or on cone in a way that's affordable for everyone in the supply chain. The business model that we put together honors the way that Lemieux Spinning has always done business, which is to be very fair and in close collaboration with the producers. We have our first wholesale seller who's going to be showcasing the collection at Knit City Montreal at the end of May. And the collection includes a 1-ply, a 2-ply, and a 3-ply yarn available on cone or in skein, undyed or in a pre-selected palette of 7 colors, and we'll start taking orders in July in time for Christmas.
Wow, that's really exciting.
I'm pretty happy about it.
What does domestic demand look like for Canadian wool, and is it growing?
Domestic supply and demand in Canada are lockstep, I'm happy to say. Demand is growing with each season, but it's doing so at a pace that our supply chain can deliver on. The renaissance of Canadian wool, I think, has been successful thus far because we are leveling up the entire supply chain simultaneously. One aspect isn't outpacing the other, and I think this is the key to long-term stability. If anybody has heard me in my presentations, I always have this give a little, get a little principle. It's, no one aspect of the supply chain needs to dive at this head first. We all need to move strategically and methodically. We need to start doing a few things differently on farm. We need to do a few things differently in the supply chains. We need to ready the supply chain for the wool that's coming towards it. And all of that has to happen in partnership with arms locked. So I think the way we're doing it is smart and solid, as opposed to doing things fast and just creating a lot of bluster and talk. I'm building something that will last for decades on in my company. And this is how I see the domestic supply chain evolving.
Excellent. So ever since I started in this industry, I have heard about how we have lost a lot of processing infrastructure in Ontario and in Canada as a whole. So is there a future? It sounds like you're working with lots of domestic processors. So is there a future where we have reestablished processing capacity to the point where Canadian wool can be utilized completely in Canada? Or does the future involve processing and production outside of Canada as well?
Oh, I love this question. I like to bring a new perspective to the discussion around wool profitability. I think it's both. I think that we have to have domestic processing and we have to work with foreigners. Yes, we need to reinvest in domestic manufacturing capacity. This is happening already. There are more and more companies picking up the torch and carrying it forward. New innovation as well will naturally demand new equipment investment. So I see all that as happening, but we need to have smart partnerships abroad. And so to me, a hybrid model is always the safest and most profitable. And what I would remind people is the goal today is not really to keep as much wool as possible in Canada. The goal is to keep as much value as possible. There will always be some bits of Canadian wool that are not profitable for the Canadian supply chain, but they could have value on the global market. They could have value for other countries' manufacturing, and we can't turn our backs on those global opportunities. We have to look at what is going to bring the most money into producers' pockets and into our domestic wool economy. And sometimes that's going to mean working with foreigners.
Okay. So when you're buying wool, what are the quality specifications that your customers are looking for? And is there a minimum flock size that you work with?
To me, it really depends on the project. My ideal, like my sweet spot is a commercial crossbred flock of 200 head or up, but I'm entirely flexible. To me, great wool is going to come on a farm that's 1 acre or 500 acres. It doesn't matter. And it comes from accelerated lambing and it comes from annual lambing. I'm ready to work with what we have. And there again, that's representative of how I do business, how I'm building my company. I don't think it works to walk into an industry with ideals and looking for a utopian scenario. I like to work with what we have, and that gives me great joy, even if it's a complex situation or a complex model. That's where I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and get to work. And it's that kind of mindset that has brought me to this point of seeing so much value in Canadian wool and getting so much of Canadian wool moving into the supply chain. I've already moved 50 tons of wool in the last couple of years. And that's just by having just being willing to work with what's there and responding to the demands that are at my fingertips.
Yeah, that's great. So is there an approach to shearing that ensures quality wool? What steps should be taken on the farm to maintain the quality of the wool after shearing?
Well, in most cases, the producers can't control how their shearer feels about wool. We did a study a couple of years ago where I asked producers if their shearer is in favor of wool or not. And there was a lot of answers coming back that said shearers were ambivalent about wool handling after it's coming off the animal. Shearers are very focused on animal welfare and the quality of the work that they're doing. But I then I prefer to work with producers on aspects that they can control. So I would say if I could give my wish list, I would say producers need to have a couple of sets of helping hands and a really good game plan before shearing day. It doesn't matter if your helping hand is a paid worker or whether it's the teenagers who are part of the family farm business, or whether it's volunteers from the community, as long as they know the drill. Rather than having them show up and no plan in place, have your workstation organized and have the people helping you be well informed. I would say that sheep need to be dry and off food and water for 12 hours. Some shearers feel that that's not enough, and others feel that it's too much time. Always go with what your shearer is requesting, because they're the ones that are going to be handling your animals. But 12 hours, I don't think you could be faulted for 12 hours off food and water. And remember that when you're triaging your sheep into shearing, you want your whitest and cleanest sheep up first, moving towards your colored and your dirtiest sheep at the end. It's the same as you don't put a red sock in with your white laundry. It's the same thing. When we see bits of brown wool mixed in with the white wool, that's where your wool bag's going to lose value, because the dark wool contaminates the white wool. So always start with your whitest and brightest and move in that direction. One of the things to realize with your sheep too is that regardless of whether your sheep is a white sheep or a creamy sheep, or like a darker white sheep, that all qualifies as white, and that will all go in one category of wool. It's when you are moving into literally colored sheep, the brown sheep, the gray sheep, the black sheep, those are colored wools, and those are what we keep separately. There needs to be some sorting and skirting that's done skillfully and vigorously, always keeping your colors separate and labeled. And your lamb's wool should also be packed separately with the bag labeled. Lamb's wool has value, but it just shouldn't be mixed in with the adult wool. Wherever you can, use square totes. It reduces shipping costs tremendously, and it is a big help as the wool moves through the supply chain. Square packs, they are able to go in and out of the truck easier. We are able to use up all the space in the truck or the cube van, whereas the sausage bags, although they're convenient and less expensive, we do not get any value in shipping those, because it takes up so much space to ship those longer sausage totes. And for your shearer, always have lots of snacks, water, any type of beverage, some sweets, anything to keep them going throughout the day. They have a hard job, and in my experience, bribery works. So if you can bribe them with some goodies, you'll be doing okay at your shearing day.
Yeah, and good tunes every time
and good tunes, yeah.
Good tunes going. So what can be done immediately at low cost to help with this Canadian wool renaissance?
Always more hands-on training for sure. We need more wool handling training, more fleece judging. We need to bring back those hand skills that have been lost, the ability to appraise wool by sight, by smell, by sound. People don't realize that wool has a sound. But when you're pulling on the staple, you can test its soundness or its uniformity by the sound that it makes when you're tugging on it. I also think that scientific testing of wool is a real ace in the pocket. I do scientific testing on just about every farm that I work with, and the results are enlightening both for me and for the producer. It's really a biometric of the health of their flock and how their farm management systems are working. So I'm a big fan of wool testing, but we still have to maintain our ability to appraise wool by hand.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in what wool testing entails. What kind of information do you get back?
Oh, we get lots of information. Typically, what's important when you're establishing the value of wool is the yield, the length, the color, and the micron. And so there are really two different ways of testing wool on the market these days. One is the OFTA, which is the optical fiber diameter analysis, and the other is airflow. Airflow technology is typically done in a laboratory setting. And for instance, when you send your wool off to be tested for a certificate to be sold in the global market, it will go to an IWTO accredited wool testing laboratory, and they have their methodologies for testing yield, length, color, and micron. OFTA readings, there are a couple of different OFTA machines. One is a portable machine and one is what they call a benchtop machine. The portable OFTA machine is in a suitcase. And in some of the larger wool producing nations, the OFTA machine will be carried to the shearing site. It will be carried to the grading barn. And it is a way to do quick, rapid testing of wool that gives it gives a little bit more information around micron. It looks at what we used to call prickle factor, but now it's called comfort factor or coarse edge on the wool. What's interesting is just because you've got a higher micron wool, if it's got a high comfort factor or a low coarse edge, it can be just as comfortable as a wool that's in a finer micron. In Canada, typically our wool has a really low coarse edge. So even though we're higher micron, we have a softer, spongier wool. The OFTA reading will tell us about crimp. It will tell us about fiber length. It will give us the standard deviation between the shortest fiber in a sample and the longest. That tells us what the regularity of that wool looks like. If we've got a big swing between the longest fiber and the shortest fiber in a sample, we know that we have quite a bit of irregularity in that wool. And all that is good information for the producer. So I use both testing methods. We now have an OFTA machine in Canada. We have it at a wool testing a testing laboratory for textiles here in Quebec. They've just acquired the OFTA machine where we can do tests on greasy wool. So that really opens up more possibilities for Canada. And otherwise, I use a wool testing laboratory in Europe that does all of my testing if wool is in the global market.
Interesting. And then how do producers use that information to tell them things about their flock health?
When you're doing an OFTA reading, it's interesting. I've actually written a blog about this that'll be available on my website in a couple of weeks. The OFTA reading will show you a graph, and it will show you one length of a fiber, and it will show the micron deviation throughout the length of that fiber, which is a picture of that animal's health throughout its growing year. So what's fun about this test is it will show one fiber length. And then when we're going through gestation and our producers are giving more groceries to the sheep, you'll see the micron open up a little bit. It'll get a little bit wider. When they go through lambing, you'll see a decrease because there's an extra stress on the body. It's the same as pregnancy in human hair. And as they're weaning, you will see the fiber start to level out. If you're looking at that fiber, you're getting a metric of how well you're feeding and how well your animal is responding just by the quality of the wool.
That is so cool.
So yeah, there's a lot of data that we can get off of the OFTA machine. That was the first fiber testing that I was ever exposed to. And to be able to look at crimp, the deviation in crimp, even on fiber length, we will see the number of fibers in the test sample. We will be able to see the shortest fiber and the longest fiber. We will be able to see that standard deviation, and we will be able to see that expressed in percentage. So there's a 26.7% deviation from the longest fiber to the shortest fiber. That, when we start doing calculations in terms of yield, that gives me a lot of information when I'm selecting wool to then go into spinning. So that's how I empower that. And a producer can look at that and I can say to them, okay, we need to improve that standard deviation. I want a goal of getting you to a 19% deviation. So next season, let's run an OFTA test again and again and see if your on-farm improvements are reflected in the test results.
Very cool. So what does the next 18 months look like for your company?
We actually have quite a bit going on in the next 18 months that I'm proud of. First of all, we're a Canadian delegation is heading off to IWTO in France next week for the annual Congress. This is where the global wool industry comes together to discuss matters of importance on the future of the global wool industry, and we get to network a little bit. So that's always pleasurable. And I'm also excited. This is kind of a scoop, Erin. This hasn't been made public yet. It will be, maybe by the time your podcast comes out, it will be in the media. But we have been awarded a subsidy for Canadian wool prototyping that's valued at $600,000.
Wow.
This is the largest prototyping subsidy for Canadian wool to be awarded in Canada and one of the largest in the world. The project is subsidized through the Quebec Minister of Economy, Innovation and Energy, and it's being underwritten by Technitextile, which is an advocacy bureau for the Quebec textile industry. The way the project is working is that it unites 6 Quebec partner companies who form part of our Quebec wool ecosystem. This is a wool ecosystem that I've kind of curated. I think is a good word. It is we have looked to bring people that are within a 2.5-hour radius closer together in a manufacturing chain. And so these 6 companies, I'm the largest partner in the subsidy. So it's my company, Jane Underhill Canadian Wool Agency. It's Lemieux Spinning, which is Canada's oldest woolen spinning mill. Milo and Dexter. That's a pretty innovative Montreal-based knitting company that a lot of your listeners might have already heard of. They have a great internet presence. Len Pierre, which is a new commercial weaving mill that set up shop in the Quebec countryside, not far from Lemieux. Duret Canada, which many of your listeners will know. They are Canada's legacy sock and mitten manufacturer. They're going to be doing some additional prototyping with Canadian wool. However, I'll give a plug for them. I did a prototyping project with them over the last couple of years, and they now have available for wholesale and retail sales, of course, socks, a collection of socks and mittens made 100% Canadian wool. Actually, I should clarify. They are, all the wool in them is Canadian, except when there's a gray stripe that is a gray wool that they have acquired from New Zealand. But through this prototyping project, we will start to be acquiring colored wool to blend in with Canada's white wool so that we avoid dyeing. When you're blending in colors with white wool, we are able to get all sorts of different natural colors without the need for dyeing. So the wool ecosystem is my company, Lemieux, Milo and Dexter, Len Pierre, Duret, and also Group CTT. And they develop a greasy wool testing facility with their new OFTA machine, which we were just talking about, the optical fiber diameter analysis machine. And so together, we are putting together a plan to move 6,000 pounds of clean wool into prototype processing, and the results from the work that we do over the next 18 months will determine how a phase 2 evolves. And you'll be hearing more about this in a public announcement in the next week or so. And then you'll be getting updates throughout the year on the progress that each one of the partners is making throughout the study.
That sounds amazing. And I have a pair of those socks.
Do you?
You talk about, and I love them. They're so cozy and perfect. Yeah. They actually they hold their shape even through washing and drying. They're
absolutely, and they're squishier. They do have some that are more the classical sock, but the Boreal sock, that's really almost like an athletic sock. And again, Duret kind of follows this same vision where everybody in the supply chain gets paid fairly. And so they create socks at a commercial capacity that are affordable for people to carry and resell to customers. Their price points are not astronomical. These are not aspirational items. These are items that can become everyday items that you have in your home and in your wardrobe.
Well, that's fantastic. So, Jane, if somebody is hoping to work with you, how do they connect with you?
They can connect with me even if they don't want to work with me. I always love talking about wool. So you don't have to come with your wallet. You can reach out and ask questions if you want. My website is juwool.com. Right now it's a landing page, but I have the new website that's launching in a couple of weeks. Or you can reach me by phone, text, or I have a Facebook page, which I think especially producers appreciate. I don't have a great Instagram presence at the moment, but I think Facebook messengers. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us all about wool and your new agency. Super interesting. Thanks so much, Jane.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Flock Talk, please subscribe through your podcast app to receive alerts for our future episodes. And please share our podcast with your friends. For more Ontario Sheep Farmers content, follow us on social media at Ontario Sheep Farmers on Instagram and Facebook, at Ontario Sheep on X, and visit our website at ontariosheep.org.